Hey folks, we are here. Season 4 has finally arrived, and that means we've been spamming out the keys. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of depletes and things like that, but in this video, we're going to be going over 15 iron docks. Hopefully you guys enjoy it, and without any further delay, let's get into it. So then, starting with the affix and what you're currently seeing on screen, the new seasonal affix is called Shrouded, and essentially, interspersed with normal mobs, there are the occasional Dreadlords or Nathrezim, and by talking to this broker at the start of the dungeon, you can select your bounty. So for every Nathrezim you capture, you get a percentage of a stat corresponding to your bounty. You get 2% stacking for crit, haste and mastery, and 1% for versatility. If you forget to talk to the broker at the start of the dungeon, it will default to versatility for you. So don't worry if you forget to talk to them before this timer expires and you start going through the dungeon. Don't worry, you're still going to get a stat, but it is going to be versatility. Now, as a Demonology Warlock, I am playing with the Implosive Legendary, so my bounty is going to be crit. If I was running Wilfred's, I'd probably go with haste. Same if I was playing Destruction, you'd probably want haste. And maybe later in the season, we'll be playing around with Affliction, because I suspect it'll either be haste or mastery for Affliction. But we will see what I can get up to. So now we've discussed Shrouded. Oh, one other thing about Shrouded as well is there is one named Nathrezim in the dungeon, and it's always in the same spot. When you run these keys, it won't move around, but it is considerably harder to kill because it has its own unique effects and abilities, and it is actually worth more stacks, essentially. So every Nathrezim you capture is worth 1, and I believe these name mobs are worth 2 or 3. So they're definitely worth getting. And sometimes you can't help but get them because they're placed in rather unique ways. So you can see that, as I said, I'm running the Implosive Legendary for this, and the reason for this is because the second boss, the Gauntlet and Enforcers, is actually a perfect Implosive fight, and when we get there you'll actually see just how much work I can do as Demonology, even though my cooldowns aren't all stacked up. Implosive potential also just gives a good amount of AoE throughout the rest of the dungeon. It does fall off on a couple of the bosses, like first and last, because there are instances during the third, which you'll see, where you can get benefit out of implosive potential. Now, obviously, one of the things with Season 4 being a time-walking season, essentially, is you're going to have a lot of people early on in the season that don't know what they're doing. So this pull cadence is a little bit slower than what you'd expect from last season, because obviously the tank doesn't really know what they're doing, or they haven't been here in a long time, and they're essentially just getting the rust off. So I would recommend for the next couple of weeks, just keep an open mind and cut some people a bit of slack. Like you can see here that the DK used Death's Caress, which is a single target long-ranged pull, essentially. Not too unlike Grip, but it applies their Blood Plague disease. The problem is he did it in such a way that we've now got essentially 3 packs to contend with here, and it's likely to be a problem because we do have Zul'Gurmath that is the named Nathrezim Dreadlord. So you get her very, very early on in the dungeon. So you get these extra stacks. And you can see that one of her mechanics is summoning this bat, which is casting Hypnosis. Now, it needs CC'd. You cannot let that Hypnosis cast go off, otherwise it pretty much spells death for whoever gets mind controlled. And as you can see, Demon Hunter went down really quickly. Now, this is just getting progressively worse and worse because the tank wasn't paying attention, was trying to kite Zul'Gurmath away from the fire and stuff, and then just proceeded to pull it straight into a foot soldier pack. So I basically call out while in pod, just reset, wipe it, let's do this again. So, Zul'Gurmox. Now, an interesting thing about the Dreadlords, especially Zul'Gurmox and her male counterpart, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but much like relics, they do maintain their health. So if you wipe to them and it's at like 20% health, when you get back to her or him, it will be still at 20% health. So you don't necessarily need to worry about, ah, shit, we just wiped it, like 3% health, and now we've got to fight 1.74 million health again. The other mechanic she does have, however, is a shield and a AoE drain life, essentially. And the shield you have to burn through before you can kick the drain health. So there is a element of pushing DPS, which is another reason why I felt that Demonology was actually really good, because it gives us funnel damage. So you're going to see that I'm going to rather poorly ramp and feed into a Zul'Gurmox. And I say poorly because my rotation is a little bit iffy. So you can see that I'm going into a 4 Tyrant, but we're then just going. Because I don't really have as much time to ramp as I'd like, because it's obviously a Quaking week and I have to bounce around the Quakings. There's been a few dungeons I've done where Quakings caught me out and I've been silenced during my ramp, which is just painful. The alternative, if you're playing Warlock, of course, is you can unending resolve while you're trying to get your Tyrants out, but that's only once every 2/3 Tyrants. So here, the Blood Siphon is this AoE heal, so you can see that she is regaining health, and we need to break that shield as quickly as we can. I do believe come regional reset, so next week, she will be getting nerfed, because that shield is a little bit of a pain to get through. Just because you can see in terms of the shield's just about to go, and it's still only got 3-second cast. Or channel, sorry. So, it's not ideal. But you can see she's worth 3 stacks, because I just went from 2 to 5. So, that is essentially 6% of your chosen stat, or just 3% versatility for taking her on. Now, there's not too much more to say for a lot of these packs. It's just fairly standard going through the rotation and dealing with Demonology as you do. Now, Dreadfang, there is a interesting boss, because it's actually 2 elements. You do enough damage to him, he dismounts, and then you have boss and dog. The dog needs to ideally die first, because it will do a considerable amount of damage pouncing onto people and just going into a frenzy. However, the boss himself will do like a dreadful aura. It's a magic thing that can be dispelled. So if you're not playing Demonology, so Destruction, having a Fell Hunter to pre-purge it essentially as soon as it's cast is fantastic, because this magical aura that he puts on means that if you hit him, you're feared. So you're going to see this in a moment. There we are. Knock Gar. Reckless Provocation. So Reckless Provocation is going to come in, and I believe I get feared. So it's a 4-second aura, essentially, but can be dispelled. Now, I resurrected the wrong person here. Should have resurrected the Hunter, really, because the Hunter was doing quite a bit more damage, but I don't know entirely if that was also because the Demon Hunter hadn't popped their cooldowns yet, or had died during them. Now, those fire arrows do hurt a lot, so you really don't want to be hanging around in them at any given moment. Now, if you're in a coordinated group, one thing that you can do to make this boss go a little bit faster, obviously if we're running implosive potential, because remember implosive potential loses value on these single target fights, is see those two mobs that are in the distance? If you had a tank that could pull those into the group, because one of those mobs is also in Nathrezim. So if I just pause it a second. My UI, I don't know if this is an LVI thing or a Plater thing, but you can see here that there is a Cloak of Shadows icon on this technician. That Cloak of Shadows icon indicates which mobs are Nathrezim or not. So from a rotational perspective, you don't actually want to target this technician with an ability. The reason for that is because the moment it engages in combat, it will no longer be a technician and it will be an infiltrator, which means that your spell will stop casting. So if you can precast into the pack, then by all means. However, if you can see the tank already running into the group, so it's going to socially aggro, do not, I repeat, do not cast onto it. I've had so many casts like just cancel on me 3/4 of the way through so far this season, and it's already becoming irritating. Now, this is going to be something where you're going to be able to see who used to play this expansion and who didn't. These two laborers that we're about to run past have a considerable amount of health, and some groups are going to try and fight them individually and deal with them. However, in the distance you will see these glowing iron Starlet models. And what you're supposed to do to make this a lot easier is if your tank runs normally with your healer to maintain aggro and keep the tank alive, the rest of the group just runs through to the iron Starlet, which you're about to watch me do, and then it's a case of being able to aim. So Belfgor does that, fires them through, I fire that one through, and then hop into the final one and fire that down range. Now, unfortunately, we've obviously missed a few mobs, and this is partially due to the first Iron Starlet being aimed to the right and sent down. If the tank had stood central to it, we could have pretty much cleared the entire thing, and this labourer would have died. Because what it now means is I have to wait for this labourer to sod off back left so I can go through without pulling. But these all give count. So this particular section is where you're going to get a bulk of your count for next to no fighting. Which means that on fortified weeks when things are a little bit more challenging, it might not be too unheard of to use the far left, the far right, run up the far right and pull these deckhands and things like that into the middle star, assuming that your tank can live. Now you can see that large labourer was an infiltrator and has turned into an infiltrator. This is a really, really good swap because it goes from having to deal with a 1.7 million health mob to something that's only 700k health. Because especially if these changes remain the same going into fortified, so these are always going to be infiltrators, that's going to be even better. Because come fortified, those laborers are going to have even more health, which is just not fun. Now, this is a gauntlet, and you're going to see that we're about to wipe because you need to wait until those cannon fires have happened. We timed it wrong, and unfortunately it's a yikes of a run back, because until you defeat the Grimrail Enforcers you will spawn at the start. So this particular run back can be very punishing. But what you're supposed to do is you wait until the cannon barrage, you then go to the next pack, because the next pack is in a small alcove, which you're about to see, and then you can continue through. Now, on the PTR, what you could do is you could gateway through the boxes. However, they seem to have patched that or changed it, and I haven't quite mastered where to place it yet. So if you can, then I'll obviously let you guys know if I figure it out or if it's been permanently changed. Obviously, the chamois didn't die, so we could have waited for a res, but now this gauntlet is done essentially in 2 stages. So you have this first stage that hits cannon barrage, and then he'll attack the second half. And the middle bit where the Ogron, the labourer, is stood is your halfway mark, where you can kind of get your breath back. But it is very, very tight as well, because you literally only have essentially a crate's width to be able to fight the Ogron, deal with it quaking, and not get clipped either front or back by these grenades that are being launched at us. So we go across, deal with the labourer. Now, I can't remember if I just Tyrant this, because obviously, minute and a half Tyrant, it will be back in time for the next boss. Or if I just got lazy and held it. I think I got lazy and held it. In hindsight, I should have Tyranted. Because if I'd have Tyranted a little bit earlier, at least, I would have extended my imps and would have had a better lineup for the bosses. Because this pack is going to die very quickly. Because we've got 1 infiltrator, we've got a couple of orcs with not a lot of health really. And make a full use of implosive potential. The pack just kind of melts. Not entirely sure what the Blood DK did there for DPS, but I'm impressed. Not entirely sure why the infiltrator has taken forever to die. But realistically, this should have been one of the first things to die, because those pools that it spawns puts you to sleep. You can dispel it if you're using an imp. So this is going to be one of the things that you get a benefit of if you're running destruction. You have your pet utility. But a tyrannical iron docksweak, as you can see, there's 3 targets there, which is perfect for implosive potential. So even if you're in a pug, talk with your tank and get your tank to pull the mobs together. Because in doing so, we end up in this situation. Now, I tried to get a 10 imp tyrant there, but what I should have done is I should have got my dogs out, because dogs are more impactful. But you can see that this isn't really much consequence anyway, because we are going to be climbing up the DPS. Now, the hunter used all their cooldowns, they're in Beastcleave territory, they're doing okay. But the haste that we get from being able to maintain implosion throughout the entire fight, or at least until one of them dies, is ridiculous. Unfortunately, the Demon Hunter goes down, so I have to spend time soulstoning, but thankfully the cast isn't too bad because of implosive potential. Now, one thing to bear in mind with implosion, for those of you that haven't played with it in a while, implosive potential and the imps as a result, it will only treat as though it hit 3 targets if your final imp hits all 3 targets. So where you're seeing Emberblade dashing off, if my last imp only clips Drugu and Nox because Ember Blade has charged out at the last possible second, I don't get the 100% odd haste that I'd be getting from my legendary. Which is why, if you look at the top left throughout the course of this fight, you've actually seen it go to like 30, 33, but then spike up to like 139 and 111 where it is currently, where my base haste is 20%. And it's because of this influx in haste, you can go with crit. So at the moment, I'm getting 18% crit through the affix of this dungeon, which gives us a really nice spread. My mastery's a little bit lower than I'd have liked, due to my gear and some of the gear that has dropped, but 40% is still okay. I'd probably want it to be sitting at 45 or 50, but the crit is better value during a dungeon for me at the moment. I might do a couple of dungeons later today or over the course of the week where I'll pick the stacking mastery instead, and we'll just see if I can make Tyrant go burr. Because obviously mastery flat increases the damage of our pets, whereas crit is RNG. I don't think crit scales with implosion, though. Mastery, sorry. I don't think mastery scales with implosion. Because implosion damage is based off how much energy your imps have left, rather than the damage of your imps. Nice amount of impage there. We're at 191% haste, which isn't bad for not having Bloodlust. Now, interesting thing, actually, about these packs is these packs on the side you don't actually need to take if you do the area with the Iron Starlet well. Like, if you do that area well, you can come out of there at like 55-ish%, which means that these side platforms hanging over the water, you don't actually need to deal with, so you can go straight down this central corridor bit. Apologies. Which kind of speeds things up, and you're not having to, you know, essentially slalom your way down this straight. But I think this was the first Iron Docks I did of the day, or of the season, so it's going to be a little bit of split hairs here and there. Now, I Felguarded there, and I've desynced my Felguard and my Tyrant. Probably not the best thing in all things considered, but when you consider that I had a copious amount of imps, it's a 3/4 target setting, and the haste will increase the damage of my Felguard plus my racial and my trinket, I thought it was a good exchange of just sustaining DPS throughout the dungeon. Because for whatever reason, the other two DPS aren't as consistent as we're used to. Whether it's cooldown timings or not really knowing the dungeons or whatever. But obviously in Season 3, we were used to having much more consistency from our teammates. So we start getting into this position where you can play around with your cooldowns, especially as Demonology, because we have a few of them to our advantage. And why, if you're learning a dungeon, you could theoretically play Wilfred's as Demonology. It's probably not ideal, and legendary-wise it's going to be Implosive Potential or Grim Inquisitors, I think. Obviously we'll get more information when the sims come out, but having Wilfred's would enable you to be a little bit more aggressive with your Tyrant usage, especially for dungeons like Upper Mechagon Workshop, and nope, basically the boss heavy Gauntlet dungeons. Where you're less interested in having to kill lots and lots of mobs, and you're having to kill priority targets frequently. Now, this is why I said that Implosive Potential on this boss does have its benefits. If I'd held my Tyrant until these were released, I could have got a lot more benefit from it. Alternatively, if I had Wilfred's equipped, I'd probably be able to get an extra Tyrant or two out in this fight. Because unfortunately, Oshir is a interesting boss. Now, Time to Feed does a lot of damage to the individual. It's a DPS race, essentially. You have to deal 8% of his health in order for him to stop this cast, but all that while, he's proper going ham on one of your characters. Thankfully, as a Warlock, I have access to a range of defensives, like I still had Unending Resolve. I could have held out probably for the entire length of the cast, but it's not great. Now, you can DPS while you're in that stunned state, so by all means, just keep going ham and hope your healer can heal through it. Use a defensive if required. Now, these Sky Terrors, not too much to say. Unfortunately, there's not like an extra 2 in the group, but it's alright. Now, here's an interesting thing. Our boy turtled and is still losing health. So Turtle will not save you during Time to Feed. Because he was still taking a considerable amount of damage, hence the forced Spirit Link. Now, Skulloc, this particular boss, is interesting because you'll see that there are boxes, and he will do a knockback and fire the cannon at you, the Gauntlet that we discussed, and then you need to interrupt it. So having a Warlock in the group is actually really beneficial because it enables you to skip cannons, essentially, because he will do very, like, it's 3, I believe. He'll just keep casting the barrage intermittently until he gets kicked during the intermission phases. And if you have a gateway or something, rather than having to take the fight slowly, you can basically just rush him and get the tank in range to kick. So you can see in comes the cannon barrage. The hunter, for some reason, sorry, the shaman, for some reason, was really, really aggressive and got the back end of the cannon barrage. You can move early if you want to, but I'd just play it safe. You don't need to take the damage. Because at the end of the day, that's why the gateway's there. So, if you're doing this in a group and you have a Warlock, make sure that you alternate who's going to use the gateway. So, kick 1, kick 2, and then if you need to, kick 3. Now, outside of just doing DPS, the order of killing them is basically just kill the 2 orcs and then kill Skulloc last, because Skulloc doesn't do a lot aside from Grand Smash, which knocks you all back, and the cannon barrage. Outside of that, he's just a tank and spank. It's the other two that are more dangerous. So the first orc did an ability like Bladestorm. It does a considerable amount of AoE damage and hurt, and the second orc, I believe, basically throws grenades around at targeted individuals. Thankfully, he dies fairly quickly. And this is one of those fights where it does get progressively easier the longer it goes on, because you've got less to fight, essentially. So if you can survive phase 1, GG. And this pretty much wraps up the dungeon. It was a nice nostalgia hit. It's good to see some other dungeons than the Shadowlands ones. Unfortunately, I have considerably less of a nice things to say about Grimrail Depot. Whoever voted for that, I curse you. I really do. Because Grimrail Depot, as I'm sure you will see many videos up and coming about it, the camera angles are atrocious, and it does not play well with mechanics or with things like quaking. Now, if it doesn't do well with quaking, imagine what it's going to be like with sanguine. Yeah. Now, one thing to note with the score, as it just showed there, this was taken very early on. That was my first, second-ish key. Second, looking at that score. And my score now, currently, is sitting at 1,121. I am currently 20th Warlock on my server, and that's where we're going to try and stay this season. So, hopefully, you guys have liked the video. I will keep you guys up to date in terms of keys, score, and things like that. And later on in the week, we will also do a Dragonflight prep update with contents about money, plans, and how Season 4 is looking in terms of that prep cycle. So, hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, folks. Have a good one.